And it's 90 degrees. And is it as humid in New Jersey as it is here? I don't live in New Jersey.
It's probably a little less than humid, but it
It's
cools
hot.
off at night. That's the saving grace, so that at least it's breathable in the evenings.
Exactly. I'll be leaving for Maine next week. I can't wait.
You're going to Maine? Where in Maine?
Maine. Julie lives in Kennebunk, my older daughter.
Kennebunkport. Oh, going to visit.
Yeah.
Isn't that where the Bushes go?
Oh, she's down the road about 3 miles from the Bushes.
Really?
Say
Wow.
hi from me. You know, I'm from Texas. So.
Rabbi, am I on? Am I
Yes, you
on?
are.
I heard the term yesterday, biblical criticism, as far as rabbis feeling comfortable and let's say mentioning that. Have you ever heard of a Rabbi David Wolpe?
Oh, of course. Yeah, he's one of probably the most famous, one of the most famous pulpit rabbis in the country. He's in LA.
If you want to hear him, a friend of ours told us he is the rabbi in residence at Chautauqua.
Oh, really?
Oh.
And he is on in the mornings, 9:15. They have a
Oh, yeah.
clip.
He's a very prominent conservative rabbi.
Well,
Yes.
go ahead, Jeff. I hadn't finished, but go ahead.
Go ahead, finish.
No, it's marriage will survive here. Okay. He's the one who brought up biblical criticism. And I just wondered, when you were in rabbinical school, was it uncomfortable if you questioned something, or you were allowed, or?
No, you were encouraged.
You were encouraged.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really taken to task for his
Moses, the Moses didn't
correct, the
exist.
Exodus.
The Exodus didn't exist. Yeah, he said that. But when he said that, you know, that in rabbinical school, we talked about that at length. It was kind of a known thing.
So quite
Moses,
interesting.
welcome.
Now, the interesting thing is he is doing all the homilies at this Methodist church service.
Oh, great.
So the service starts off at 9:15 in the morning. You know, they do their thing with the organ and the singing and everything else. And then they introduce the rabbi who gives the homily, and he's doing this for an entire week. So
Nice.
it's quite interesting. It's their look-see, an expert look-see into what, of course, they call the Old Testament.
Very cool. Yeah. And again, biblical criticism really is from the 19th century on has been kind of the center. And here is Moti Locke, everybody.
You hear me?
Yes. Hi, Moti. How you doing?
I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't get into the Zoom in my office, so I ran home, and I think now I'm.
I think you have. Are you using the off? Yeah. I would turn off the.
Oh, yeah, I did. I just did. Yeah.
All right. This is Moti, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
As I said, this is on July, well, a nice small group, mostly in this case from Sun City. And Moti, of course, we're going to be introduce them in about 2 minutes and we'll start. And yeah, everybody we know is Zoom. Whenever we're on Zoom, we all know somebody's going to have issues. About 30% of the time it's me. And so, but I'm glad you guys got it straight now. This is also his wife, Ava, next to him. And this, again, will be on YouTube. So we'll have more people looking later on.
Last month we had Moti was on. He had a terrific discussion of Fauda. On,
Oh, really?
do you remember that? Yeah. So he was on from, I guess, AA, and he apparently, you know, based on his military service, plus I think, Moti, you said you knew the director of Fauda or one of the screenwriters and or some of the actors, and it was just a fascinating discussion. Maybe the rabbi asked a couple of questions in that vein.
Yeah, let's work that into it, Fauda.
Yeah.
Well, so
well, before we start,
I've been doing few of those. I'm doing now another one in August. I can send you afterwards a link about Srugim, which is translated to Hebrew. It's called Knitted, which is basically about modern Orthodoxy in in Rechavia, which is the swamps of all the shishi place for the modern Orthodoxy in Israel, like the parallel of probably Upper West Side, Upper Riverdale and this area in New York. So I'm trying to bring Israeli focus group into Savannah, basically.
Well, it's working because everybody's talking about several shows. But first of all, we'll go and start. If anybody comes in a second, Moti is from Jerusalem.
Right.
Born and raised, he got his master's degree in philosophy and Jewish education. He was an educator for many years at Medlitz Institute at Woodges, which I went to, but I went to the one in Arad, and of course for the Jewish Agency, which I sponsored his first trip over here. Before that, he was the director of the adult division of the Bronfman Center and director of Project Arevim. And then after he was the Jewish Shaliach, the representative from the Jewish Agency, he became, how long did you do that? 1 year or 2 years before?
4 years.
Full 4 years. 4 years. He was.
Wow.
I didn't realize you'd done it that long. Then afterwards, he became the exec director of Agudat Achim, the conservative synagogue, and he has been doing that ever since. So he's been the exec director for now 15 years. And of course, his wife, Ava, is the executive director of the Shalom School, which is the dual Sunday school between the two synagogues. And he has 3 children, Tomer, Uri, and of course, if you don't know them, all wonderful, include Shani. All 3 of them now are adults, young adults living in Israel. Wonderful kids, 2 of them are twins, and they just, the last 2 graduated, not this past year, but the year before. So they're all in Israel, either doing their service or going to school. And again, we are so proud. He's also a good friend of mine and has been a wonderful leader in this community, again, for 19, 20 years. And we're so privileged to have him and his family here. And again, this is mostly from Sun City, but some from Savannah as well. So welcome, Moti Locker.
Hey.
And what we'll do here is, this is a little bit interviewing about his life in Israel, about his life in Savannah. We'll certainly talk about his military life. This is Maury, Andrea, Sheila, Larry, and Jane, and Flossie and Jeff.
Hey guys.
Everybody's waving. I'm going to put everybody on mute. And if you want to ask a question, we'll just invite you to do so. But again, I hope everybody is doing well and hope everybody is safe. If you have any other questions you want to do on chat, you can just send it on chat. And then, so Moti, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? I know you were raised in Jerusalem, but do you have siblings, and what was it like growing up in Israel?
Well, so as Rabbi has said, I was born in Jerusalem. Actually, my both parents already born in Jerusalem, and we have from one side of the family, we're 8th generation in Jerusalem. Now, you should understand that being 8th generation in Jerusalem is really, really rare. I mean, Israel is a country of immigrants. So to have 8th generation back in Jerusalem, it's like one of a few, which I take a big pride of. I came from a family of, on my father's side, of a big pioneer. My great-grandfather, Ber Locker, was the chairman of the Jewish Agency and the chairman of the Israeli parliament. He was known as a revolutionary socialist. And my mom is the great-great-great-daughter, 9th generation from the Kotzke Rebbe, which is one of the famous Hasidim movement. So her grandpa, which I actually lived to know, was the Rebbe of Mea Shearim. As the story goes that in 1937 in Bialystok, his wife told him one day that the Russians are coming and everybody's coming, and she took the last boat to Palestine, and with her she took her 5 children, and as a result of this, he stayed with his Hasidim in Bialystok, and after a month couldn't live without her, and took another boat with 50 Hasidic family and went and lived in Jerusalem, and they built Mea Shearim. So, so when my parents got married, my father from this secular, Marxistic, I would say, socialistic definitely family, and my mom from a Hasidic ultra-Orthodox family, it was like I don't know who. Rabbi Haas is kind of traditional, so I'll say for the sake of the discussion, Rabbi Belzer granddaughter is marrying with Rabbi Slater's grandson. Much worse. So,
Was that even allowed? That
so
almost seems like it would be almost, I mean, that's like almost the Hatfields and McCoys in some way, like two
right.
very different worlds.
So Bill Locker, my great grandfather from the non-religious side, was known as a very, very famous speaker. And in those days, they didn't have movies, they didn't have theater. So on Saturday night, he used to speak in the only theater in Jerusalem in Edison Street, which was the edge of Mea Shearim. And my great grandfather from the other side always said that he would sneak in to listen to Ber Locker, because even though he was anti-religious and blah, 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 he was really a great scholar and a great Talmid Chacham. Because, which means like a real Jewish scholar, because, you know, they all, even those revolutionaries, studied in yeshiva. So, you know, they all came from kind of the same background. So this is the background of my family. I don't want to linger on it. I just wanted to tell you where I'm coming from. So on Mount Herzl, there is Herzl buried. And then next to Herzl, if you walk about 50 feet, there is the grave of his wife, his two daughters, and my great-grandfather, Ber Locker, and his wife, Malka. So this is my yichus, my Zionistic yichus. My ultra-Orthodox yichus, it's pretty known. I don't need to tell you about the Kotzker Rebbe. So I grew up in this city in Jerusalem. My father worked in Hadassah all his life. I don't know if you're a Hadassah supporter. My grandfather was the director of Hadassah. My dad was a doctor in Hadassah. We are 4 boys. We all born in Hadassah and Karem. And the legend said that the first Hebrew sentence that I said was that Hadassah will burn to hell in Hebrew. This was when I was a year and a half, that's what I said. And everybody asked why, because when I looked around, always I asked, where's daddy? Is in Hadassah. Where's grandpa? Is in Hadassah. Where's grandma? She's in Hadassah. So I knew that Hadassah is taking all my adults. So I hated Hadassah. That's what I can tell you about Hadassah. Having said that, I was born there. My 3 brothers born there. And my brit was in this little beautiful Chagall synagogue. And I grew up in Jerusalem. Yeled Tov Yerushalayim. It's an expression in Hebrew that basically said, good kid Jerusalem. You know, there was nothing exciting about my life as growing up. I was a good child, didn't make too many trouble, studied well, and eventually went to the army. That's about my upbringing. We were a house of 4 boys, and among them we have 4 paratroopers. And my dad was also a combat. So there was time, and my parents really relatively had me when we were young, when they were young. So we had a time where my mom had, I think, 4 or 5 of us in the army all at the same time.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Jerusalem, it is very rare for someone to have several generations, and even in Israel, to have it in Jerusalem is even more so. And Mea Shearim, if you haven't been to Israel, is an ultra-Orthodox section. It's probably the most famous one. And so to have someone who has family from Mea Shearim and anywhere else is even today very rare. So it's really quite remarkable to have that kind of answer. And of course, having a famous rabbi in the family is really incredible. So you were raised in Jerusalem with even somebody in a young man like you is still it's not very rare, it seems like, to have been raised in Jerusalem only, a couple 20 years or so after it became part of Israel. So
yeah, I actually born to separated Israel. I mean, I was a baby when I was like 2.5 years old when Jerusalem was reunited or taken back, or whatever your political view about what happened. But I can't tell you that I remember Jerusalem is divided, but I definitely was there.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
6-day war happened while I was in the shelter in Jerusalem. The bombs were falling around me. It wasn't. My dad was actually the first soldier to reach the tomb of Rachel in Bethlehem. And when he got there, he really didn't believe. He believed. He knew that he didn't know what it looked like, but he did recognize it from the picture. So he decided to take a stone from near the gate, like a big stone from the fence, and bring it and show it that he was the first person to be there. Nobody believed him. So after they took this stone and saw that it was really the stone that was standing by the gate, by the metal gate to enter. So Yeah.
Do you still have that stone?
No, we put it back.
Okay.
We were forced to put it back. My dad was forced to put it back.
And if you don't know the tomb of Rachel, that of course is the tomb of one of the matriarchs, Rachel. So really very prominent site in Israel. A lot of people go there. Well, now they do. They didn't before 1967. So you mentioned serving in the military. And again, you were speaking about FALD earlier, and we will talk about that. So I think most of us realize that almost all Israelis serve in the military. So what was your service like? And could you tell a little bit about what are the rules for serving in Israel in the military?
Well, the Israeli army changed a lot since I served in the Israeli army. But I started in a combat unit in the paratrooper, Sanchanim, as they said. And then I went to some more intelligent work within this unit. The Israeli army is very different than the American army. First of all, it's based on volunteer. Everybody is volunteer except, officers are deciding to stay and get paid. 85% of the soldiers are kids 18 to 21, 22 that that going to the army and basically serve the country. So it's very, very different in many ways. In a funny way, I'll tell you that I think I mentioned it in my other class in Andrea, was that in Israel, we go home from the army almost every other week. And if for some reason we didn't, so by Tuesday afternoon, there is what they call after. They will put us on a bus and bring us to the center of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, whatever, and announce to all the parents that, that the kids are there and they can come and see them and spend with them 4 hours, between 4 to 8. Well, I'm telling you this just so you'll understand that an Israeli soldier are really kids. They are, so when somebody sends his children to the army, he's basically become part of the army. So daddy is brushing the shoes when you come back on Friday, mommy is doing the laundry. The food that the unit is eating is basically, there is the dining room and there is the nice kitchen of the army, but really it's the cumulative effort of the mother that sends the watermelon, the twist, the Mars and the Twix and the ice cream and whatever it is. One time, somebody was asked, why do we have this after 4 hours? Why are we schlepping those soldiers to come 2 hours drive from the north of Israel or from the south of Israel to come to Tel Aviv? So my commander said that he can mess with Hezbollah, with Iran, with Egypt, with everybody, but he's not going to mess with the Jewish mother. So he knows that the Jewish mother need to see the children. So he's following orders. So not about the joke, but about just for you to understand the dynamic of the army, the involvement of the civilian in the army is huge. Everybody is part of the army. And like everything else in Judaism, Rabbi Hatz can tell you how many members are in Mikveh Israel?
About 400 families, I think, 410.
All right, so Rabbi Hatz can tell you that you basically have 800 bosses, right? If you multiply it by husband and wife. So in Israel, the army is basically the army of the nation, and everybody is the controller of the army and the big chief. So we have a chief of staff, but the real chief of staff are sitting in home and calling and telling the army what to do and what to buy and how to feed the children and how to treat them when they are not feeling well and which medication they need to take. And this is the dynamic of one of the, if not the strongest army in the world, one of the strongest army in the world. So this is the environment that we grew up on. My commandos in my boot training at the beginning of the army seems like God to me, was actually a grandchild of my grandmother, good friend. So just for you to understand, if I wanted to talk to him, he was the commander of the unit, okay, which means that he was in charge of 130 soldiers. So there was one little commander that was in charge of 10, and above him there was another one who was in charge of 30, and then he was above this one. So if I wanted to talk to him, I would write a letter to the one that's in charge of me that will transfer the letter to the one that will transfer to him. So the second Shabbat that we were released home before Shabbat, and he got us all together and we stood up in line of 3, and he said, does anyone has anything to say? And I raised my hand and I said, Commander Giora. And he looked at me and I said, you have regard from Safta Mina, from Grandma Mina. and this was the end of it for my Shabbat. I stayed the Shabbat with him in the bases. I didn't go home as a punishment, but it was like breaking the distance with God, which really killed him. But when you think about it, so this big God of the soldier was actually somebody that was exactly in my position a year and a half before and became an officer. So this is kind of the Israeli army. Everybody knows what everything, everybody's getting to everything, and the relationship are really not based on hierarchy so much, but more of trust and unity and understanding the mission. And the mission that we all grew up to is, you know, we are a small country surrounded by enemy and need to protect it. And I think this was kind of drilled to our mind since we were nurse feeding from our mother.
And when you mentioned the superior who was 3 times up, he was only what, you were 18, he was probably 19 or 20.
20, yeah. Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what that the unit he was in is kind of like the American Green Beret. So Andrea, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, Marty, with having 3 brothers in the service, did that cause problems with you guys? I mean, were you competitive, or did you have to hear about, oh, you're so-and-so's brother, or did they have to hear, oh, you're Marty's brother? And, you know, was it a good thing, more positive, or was it more negative?
No, it was only positive. There was no really competition between us. I mean, we were separated enough in age, so, you know, we weren't really in the same. And yeah, and it's definitely helped, you know, so every Israeli soldier, you know, we have those, what you call it, storage of equipment and clothing that you get in the base, but every Israeli soldier is building his own inventory at home. So it was very helpful for my brother. I was the oldest, that we have already inventory at home. So if you lose a shirt, you can get from the inventory at home, you know. So we slowly, everybody's sneaking another shirt, another underwear, another, you know, magazine or whatever it is. And, and so we had these things that, you know, we all in it together. Yes, and there were some guys that I trained with that happened to be commander for my brother, and, you know, and it definitely was helpful for my brother to get into the unit because, you know, the name was known and you know, and when they went to the training, I'm sure. But yeah, so it's more like, I don't think there was a negativity to it. There was one time that was really, really stressful. I think it's kind of a secret, but not that much of a big secret now. It's been 30 years. I don't know if you remember, but about 30 years ago, there was an Israeli soldier called Nachshon Wachsman that got kidnapped by the Hamas. And Israel was trying to get into him. And the assumption was that he was in Gaza. Actually, he was in a neighborhood of East Jerusalem called Bir el-Nabala, which was really not far from where I grew up. And I was in the headquarters of so there was an operation. Basically, the Arab put an ultimatum to kill him if we won't release some terrorists that there was no way we're going to release, and the commando unit were supposed to go in, and we were in a situation where my 2 brothers were there in the unit that came in. One brother was in the unit that surrounded the area, and he didn't even know why, and the other brother was in the commando small group of people that really enter to the house where Nachshon was really held. This is like a fauda scene. And I was in the headquarters in Tel Aviv, knowing that all this going on and hiding it from my parents while all this happening. And it's all happening on Saturday afternoon when we are all 3 frum boys. In other words, of course, when it's come to pikuach nefesh, for sake of life, nobody's, you know, we're not shomer Shabbos in those situations, but we didn't keep. But there was a situation where I know for a fact that my 2 brothers are in Bir Nabala, endangering their life to the degree that they might even shoot each other, because it was very, very secretive. And what Israel tried to do, Israel tried to make the Palestinians think that we believe that the guy is in Gaza. And this is a situation when you talk about 3 brothers. I mean, this is really a scenery from Fauda or any other books that you can think about. Unfortunately, the terrorists succeeded to kill Nachshon Wachsman before we got there, and actually 2 Israeli soldiers got killed. Among them was the deputy commander of Sayeret Matkal, which is the flag unit of the Israeli commando.
And again, in Israel, everybody knows each other. So something like this, you know, touches every single person.
Definitely.
It's a small country, And everybody, a lot of people, I know it's changed a little bit, but they used to all get their jobs, their connections all came from their military service. And so how's the military changed today? You mentioned it's a little different today.
So I want to pick on something that you said about Israel is small. Israel is small, but Israel changed dramatically in the last decade and a half. Israel grew up huge since the Russian immigration. We have an immigration wave of over 1 million people to a country that at the time was 4 million. And now we are already 6. So Israel almost doubled itself in the last 20 years. So if you go to the time that I was in the army in 87, so Israel was a 3.5 million people country. Now we are 7 million people. So Israel is really, really condensed and populated and growing. So everything is growing. The army is growing, and the thing of know each other is growing, and we were more. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that Israel is a very modern civilization. I was just thinking about it. There is 2 companies now leading the chase for the corona vaccine, right? So the director of Moderna, his name is, you can look it up, Israeli, I think his name is Reuven Sachs, he's an Israeli guy. And Zanka, the company in Oxford that talking so much about, their achievement in the last 2 days, actually have the developed centers that nobody's talking about in Israel. So Israel is really cutting edge. And when it comes to the army shifted a little bit more towards this direction, Rabbi. So to answer your question, I feel like today's Israeli army is really taking the good and the best towards intelligence, towards computer fight, cyber fight, all kind of electronic fight, and all kind of mishugas that nobody really even know how they do and what they do, but I think that's the focus now of the
It's
of
really
the core of
interesting.
the army.
When you go to Israel now, if you went to Israel 20 or 30 years ago, you saw young guys and gals with machine guns just walking around everywhere. They've changed the policy now. So if you're in your miluim, you don't have your gun with you at all times for various reasons. So it's a very different place just to go now, and you don't see everybody with guns everywhere. It was very interesting. So after you finished the military, you went to work, and what did you do before you moved to America?
So I was studying. I started to, well, my parents, mommy and daddy, wanted me to do something that provides. So they made me, and I told you I was a good kid. So they made me study economy. So I studied economy and business management, and I really didn't like it. So when I finished my BA, I said, okay, I'm done now. Can I do what I like? So they said, fine. And then I went and I studied Talmud and Jewish philosophy in Hebrew U, and I finished my master in Jewish philosophy, but I was already an Alte Kaker by then, an old guy. So while I was studying, I also started to work, and I became the director of Wurgis, and I started this program in Wurgis that's called Tochnit Arevim, Project Arevim, which basically sending young Israeli to small Jewish community around the world. So when it started, it was very exotic. The places that I used to send people were in Bristol. I think me and another guy was actually the first that went. And so I went to Westcliff on Sea in England, and he went to Bristol in England. And afterwards, when I came back, I became the director of the program, and we kind of got some budget for the Jewish agency. As you understand, I had some connections, so I got some money for it. And we started to send people to all kind of exotic places like Salonika in Greece, Barbados, where the Shaliach in Barbados, in Paramaribo, in all kind of weird places in the world. And basically they did the same work that Shaliach does that I did afterwards in Savannah, Georgia. So I did it for 10 years, and I got to know many, many Jewish communities. And I started also to work with the Joint to send Israeli to Russia and to East Europe. And we started, which was totally, this is time of the Iron Curtain. I mean, I'm talking about time when you couldn't go. So we sent people to Novosibirsk, we sent people to Prague, we sent people to wherever we could, Romania to Bucharest, in Budapest, we sent some people, and basically start to teach Judaism, a little bit of Hebrew reading, a little bit on Zionism. And that's what I did. And I loved it for many, many years. So through this, I got to work with a lot of Jewish community, and I ended up working with a group of young people from Savannah that came to Israel in a group that called SEMEL. It was a very interesting thing that would never happen in our days. It was a group that was built from third from each congregation. Can you imagine? So there was third from Mikveh Israel, third from AA, and third from BBJ, and they all lived happily together. I still don't know how, but anyway, it happened. And they came to Israel, and I was a scholar in residence, they call it. And I really fell in love with them, and they didn't hate me either. And they came up with this idea that we'll come to be shaliach here. And that's how I ended up in Savannah.
And the
Yeah.
shaliach is in Israel. Were you through the Jewish agency that you were the shaliach? Or is
Well,
it-
yes and no. I was, so at this time I were already kind of, the head of this small Jewish community shlichut program. So the Jewish entity really didn't want me to go. So I got a leave of absence from Bronfman Center. Charles Bronfman basically subsidized it, and they sent me to Savannah. There was some people in Savannah that were very close, the Malavras that were very close with the Bronfman, and they basically agreed together to pay for shlichut program. So the Jewish entity were not willing to pay for Savannah. So basically, it was I was a shaliach of the Jewish agency, but the Jewish agency decided not to pay for it. So it was Bronfman was paying for the Jewish agency to send me to Savannah. I'm trying to be honest for the sake of the truth. So the Bronfman Center is actually have the rights for bringing me to Savannah.
Well, and we did later have a shaliach here for several years. I know my first 2 years here we had one, but then we stopped the program. It's kind of like all around the world. It's a representative from Israel. And so we've had, I know, did we have them different? Did the Jewish agency start sending them after you for a couple of years? Or
Yes,
did you come with that
so
program?
so after me, there was shlichim that were what we call small shaliach. So when we came as a shlichut, so it was already me, Eva, and the three kids. And a small shaliach is basically a single young person immediately after the army, in opposed of somebody that comes with a work background and whatever. So yes, so the Jewish agency continue afterwards with sending this small shlichim, and this stopped also. The idea was basically that you come to a community, you learn about the community, and you're bringing taste of Israel into the community by doing activities around the Jewish holiday, by doing all kind of cultural activity, by teaching Hebrew, by doing a film festival or whatever it is. As somebody that ran this program for many years, I can tell you that I think as much as this program was a benefit for the Jewish communities wherever the shlichim were, it was a huge benefit for the shlichim themselves. Each person of those people that came and got a taste of American Jewry learned so much and changed so much perspective about life. Because, and I'm a little bit off subject, maybe, Rabbi, but
Impossible talking.
I'll tell you a story about my grandfather. So my grandfather, after he came to Israel, never left Israel. And all his life, he wanted to go to Brooklyn. When you ask him where he wants to go, he wants to go to Brooklyn. My wife wants to go to Costa Rica. He wanted to go to Brooklyn. Why to Brooklyn? So he always said that, that he ended up in Palestine, but there was many people in his shtetl that ended up in Brooklyn. And he doesn't know what Brooklyn is all about, but he knows that he could have gone to Palestine or to Brooklyn. He ended up going to Palestine. It might as well be that he would end up somewhere else. And it's really the story of the Jewish people. The majority of Ashkenazic Jews, we basically split into two. Half of us went to Palestine, that became Israel, and half of us went to America. I know that they all did not necessarily go to Brooklyn. Obviously, some Jews came to Savannah and established Mikveh Israel, thanks God for that. But that's our story. And I think that those shlichim that come here and see this, they are the grandchildren of those people, and see what happened. They fascinated by this establishment of so much different Jewish life and different taste of Jewish life and different focuses. And it's very hard even for Israeli to understand Reform Judaism or conservative Judaism. it's a little bit different now because it's a little bit more popular now and a little bit stronger now. But generally speaking, Israelis hardly knows about conservative and Reform Judaism. It's definitely something that they feel comfortable with. But that's only one aspect. There is tons of other aspects about, for example, Israel was built as a socialistic country, and therefore all the volunteerism aspect of the individual are really under the structure of the government. And here we have a whole bodies of volunteerism that are the modern version of the shtetl, Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, tzedakah, helping with meals, helping with burial, helping, when somebody dies in Israel, nobody worried about who is going to bury him. You just call the Minister of Health and then send the Chevra Kadisha, and the Chevra Kadisha burying him, and then they're in charge of everything, and then they put the stone, and it's a done deal. Here, of course, me and Rabbi was handling somebody, somebody that nobody knew that died in Savannah, and we needed to find him a burial. The community is dealing with so much things here that as a stranger, Israeli stranger, and it's like coming from a different star almost, and seeing all these things and learning so much and understanding so much. Some people love it, some people hate it. I fell in love with it. I think that it's really great. I think that Jewish community in America have so much to offer to Israelis.
Do we have any questions before we ask him a little bit more about his? Okay, we're going to go to Larry and Jane. And Larry, go ahead and unmute yourself. All right, Larry. You got it, Larry? It's on the bottom left.
Okay.
There we
Jane
go.
did it.
Perfect.
Yeah, now we're in the middle of the screen. We just got this new iPad, and it's
And we can't work.
everything is touch on it, and it's all different finger motions. Moti, yeah, really fascinating. And I almost forgot what my question was, but a couple of questions. One, could you go back a little bit to the Israeli army and talk about the role of women, and how are they integrated into the Israeli army? Are they also same type of service? I know they're in military and combat units as well. And also, you had mentioned that the 1 million Russians that came in, was that, you would say, the largest change that you had seen? We hear a lot about, newcomers to Israel, the people from Africa, the Russians, and many of them don't have the same Zionist fervor. Could you talk a little bit about what you feel, the attitudes now toward Israel and Zionism?
Yeah. So let's start with the army and girls. So girls in the army, well, like anywhere else in the world, I can't tell you that the army was looking for. First of all, Israeli army always had women in the army from the get-go. We boys are going to 2.5 years, and girls are going to 2 years. So there are some units that are mixed units, some units that are separated. It used to be that girls will not go to combat because there was this notion what will happen if they will go hostages and whatever, but it's definitely changing now. I have two nieces that are in officer training now. One of them is actually a trainer of paratrooper. The Israeli put only girls to be the physical trainer of paratrooper because the boys would never let the girls run faster than they are. And basically she's in charge of the physical training, and they need to keep up with her. And the fact that she's a girl making it much harder on the ego to give up, and therefore their achievements are much better. But that's on a funny side. On a real side, I mean, they are getting more and more to any field in the army. We have now women tanks girl, like unit of girls that fighting in tanks. We have women that definitely in intelligence, definitely, but also in the combat more and more. We have, I think, in the last pilot training in the Israeli army, there were 4 girls that finished the course, and 2 of them are going to be combat pilot. So just so you understand, Israel does not have in one course a year more than 50 pilots. It's not like the American army, 4 is a beginning. It's a number. It's not insignificant. And I think that more and more you see girls in the army, more and more involvement. The idea is also to linger their time. So we'll have the same amount of time for girls as boys. And if you ask me, in 10 years' time, I don't think that there will be any difference between boys and girls in the army. And there are few fields that the army finds that girls are much better. For example, it's funny, but you can see it in Fauda, that the girls are the one who sit on the computer and doing all the viewing of the field. I don't know what you call it, tatspitaniot, like they searching the area to see if there is any person. Rabbi, if you can help me with the English here, is it entering and crossing the borders or something like this? Because they find out that statistically girls are much able to concentrate better than boys, and therefore they are much better on this field. And sure enough, we know that, I'm sure you heard it in the news, there was at least 3 events lately in the last 2 years that Hezbollah succeeded to sneak people under tunnels, and they were discovered by 18 and a half years old girls that were sitting and watching their television, sometimes at home, and just watching, what you're supposed to do, and saving many, many lives. So girls are totally involved in the Israeli army. And the other question was about the Russian immigration. So Israel was very good about observing the Russian, all the Russians that came from Israel, whether they Zionistic or not, was really not that much of a difference. They were all very, very educated people. Russia put a lot of emphasis on education. It might not be a Western education, but they were equipped with a lot of knowledge and a lot of ability of studying. And many, many of them diverted their profession. So Israel does not have that many trained. So when we got like half a million of trained engineer, we didn't know what to do with them, but it was very easy to transfer a trained engineer into a high-tech engineer, or at least easier than to take somebody that was not an engineer at all. And Israel slowly, within a decade or so, find those people a path into the Israeli society. Now, Russian they are not Zionistic in the form of old Zionism, but Israel generally is not Zionistic in the old form of Zionism that we know it. Now it's really a little bit more capitalistic, a little bit more like in America. It's a little bit me in the focus and less the country in the focus, but yet it's giving a huge benefit to the edge of the Israeli high-tech possibilities. I mean, and it's pushed the Israeli economy in a dramatic way, and gave those people a lot of benefit for their effort. So yes, it's a very good wave that came to Israel. Some of them left to Russia. Some of them stayed in Israel and are not Jewish and assimilated within Israeli society. But generally speaking, they gave a huge boost to the Israeli economy and to the level of education and culture. I mean, before this Russian immigration, who knew about Israeli opera? Now we have opera houses, we have classic music in every corner of a street, and things like this. That Israeli was not known to be such a great macher on it, and now it's there.
And when you went to Israel in the 90s, and you saw, all these street musicians, and you'd ask where they trained, and you said they'd find out that they were part of some big orchestra in Russia, but there just wasn't, Israel didn't have city orchestras for every single one, or opera. So it looked like everybody who was sweeping the floors and who were janitors were engineers back in Russia. And it was quite amazing. If you think of the numbers, Israel had less than 3.5, 4 million people, and then 1 million come in. So that's like America today bringing in 100 million people and having to find jobs for them and being welcoming and trying to create systems for them. So you can see what kind of difficulty Israel faced. So any other questions before? I'd like to talk a little bit about Savannah, since he's been here for a long time. He's been part of this community for 20 years. So you stayed here afterwards, and what have you enjoyed about your time in Savannah?
Renee, you want to? I thought Rabbi Renee.
Somebody have a question? Sorry.
Yeah,
did Rena, you have a question? I'm sorry, Rena. Rena, just unmute yourself.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I find you fascinating. I have two quick questions. One is an Israeli part of the Oxford study, were you saying, is for getting the vaccine for coronavirus?
Well, Israel is not the Oxford study, but Zanka, the company, has their development center in Israel, in Nahariya, actually. So Israel has a lot to do with it. It's a little bit under the radar, but the development center of this company is actually located in Israel.
So is it a race between, who finds the cure first?
Well, Zanka trying to do something. Well, that's really not our subject, but I'll just say that Zanka.
All right, I'm
doesn't want
sorry.
to,
I
it's
just
fine.
wanted to-
Zanka
No,
doesn't
no,
want to give it to.
is great.
They don't want to give it to countries. They want to give it to organization. So they want to give it to, let's say, the CDC, the European Union, and whatever, and let them decide who will get first and who needs first. That's their policy. Yeah, I think that the fact that Israel has some connection to the company probably ensuring that Israel will be covered. But
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
And so after you finish, it's very rare. Most of the time, if you come to the US as a shaliach, you go back to Israel, usually after a couple of years, but Moti decided to stay in Savannah.
Actually, not exactly, Rabbi. We went back to Israel. I don't know
did
if you know.
I did not know that.
All right. So after we finished here, we went back to Israel. Actually, I went back to my job at Bronfman. Eva went back to our Minister of Labor job, which is another fascinating story. And about a year later, the Rabbi of Agudat Achim left, and they didn't have anyone. And they said, "Can you come in to fill in?" And to be honest, we really didn't want to come. Don't tell anyone that I told you, but not because we didn't love it. We love Savannah. We really love Savannah. It's just that we were already settled in our home and in our jobs and whatever, and it's just too much of a schlep. So we told them that if they will get us a visa, a green card, we'll come. But we saw that it will never happen because it was after the 11th of September, and at the time there was almost none visa to anyone to come to America, especially not from the Middle East. And even from Israeli, because the American government tried to balance between the Israeli and Arab country, and they really didn't want to give. Anyway, to make long story short, they got this big shot lawyer from Atlanta, and one day we get a phone call from the East Jerusalem consulate of the American embassy inviting us for an interview. We didn't have a clue what we're going for, and they said, "Bring your passport with." And I'm telling you, we did not have a clue what we're going for. We almost forgot about our promise. It was so random. And then we went there, and to make long story short, we came an hour later home from East Jerusalem with a passport with not a green card, but a visa for like 5 years to come to America for work. So we decided that it's Bashert, and we came, and since then we stayed. Sure enough, we stayed, but our kids waited till they were old enough to stand on their feet and basically told us, "You, Michiginer, you love Savannah, you want to stay in Savannah, that's fine, but forget about us, we're going." And they all went to Israel, each one in their time. And they're all doing pretty well in engineering school, the boys, and Shani in business school in Herzliya. So that's about our story and how we came. So when you came, I started to work in the Jewish community in the synagogue. Yeah.
And what have you seen as a change in Savannah over the last 12 to 15, 20 years?
Well, so a little bit like in Israel. So Savannah, the Jewish community of Savannah really grew up. When I came, it was much more concentrated in Habersham Wood, Midtown, and at the time, the Mikveh Israel people were a little bit separated from the community, and it was more the BBJ people. And now things change. Thanks God, we have Mikveh Israel is very involved in the community, and very active in our community and taking part in the board, in the funding, and everything. It wasn't the case when I came, so this is a big change. But I think also the Jewish community grew up here. Not grew up here, the number grew. And if it used to be like all Savannian, like 100 generation Savannian, now we have more and more outcomer, like you guys. You're all not from Savannah. And well, I know you're living in Bluffton, but for the sake of the discussion, and it's a community of foreigners. It's a community of people like me that came and not have the brothers, their grandchildren, their great parents, everybody here. So I think that's really a big change. I also want to say that the big change for me, from moving from Israel to Savannah, was more than moving from Israel to America, moving from a big place to a small place. Living in Jerusalem, I used to drive to my office, crossing the city. My home was in Mount Corpus, which is in the north side of Israel. I would drive to Talpiot, which was the Bonfim Center on the south side of Jerusalem. I would cross through road number 1, that it was basically the border between Israel and Jordan, crossing the old city and going to Talpiot and to the Tayelet. And this was my view. It used to take me 55 minutes every morning, bumper to bumper. I came to Savannah and my life became a half a mile square altogether. My home, my synagogue, my hospital. Whenever goes to teach in Shalom School, she's really, really going far for a long trip. She's taking like sandwiches, because she's going to drive 5 miles. So, our life here are much more life of a small community when everybody knows everybody and everybody is pleasant and everybody is calm. And in Jerusalem, it was a little different. It was much more the busy and excitement of a big town like New York. When you come out from my house, there is a 4th Street stop sign. So in Israel, when there is a fourth sign, everybody is rushing to go in, right? I mean, because you want to be the first. That's the Israelis, right? They have to be the first. So these things will never last in Israel because it will create an accident every 5 minutes. So in Savannah, it's pretty obvious. I'm the only Israeli, so I'm going, and then the people, no matter which direction I'm going from, the other people are waiting. So it's very easy for me to drive in Savannah because everybody's so pleasant and nice, except me. And it's a joke, but seriously, I mean, there is something to be said for the calmness and the quietness and the nature and all those things that we have here in this town, and compared to living in a big place. Even if you drive through the old city of Jerusalem for work, but if it's bumper to bumper for 55 minutes every morning, it's taking its toll.
I've lived in big cities, and I don't think I'd ever want to drive in Jerusalem. It was never meant to have that many cars, I think. Before we conclude, and yet, by the way, he is also a very nice guy, even if he is more of an aggressive driver than many of us. And for those of you who know, in Israel, there's far more people who are injured or killed in car accidents than all the wars put together by far. Larry, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if, Moti, if you can give us a real quick view of the headlines. We've kind of lost sight of, Israeli, everything has gone to the back pages now on the news and everything.
So,
could you give us an update on
Israel is really
the settlements?
Well, nobody really dealing with the settlements now. I think that there was an idea of Israel annexing the Judah and Samaria or Palestine territory, whatever you call it, either way of the maps that you are, but it's kind of pushed to the side because of the corona. Israel is getting hit by the corona terribly in the last few weeks. The first wave of corona in Israel was handled very, very well. Unfortunately, Israel opened probably too quick, and it's really bad. We have about, I think the number are about 1,800 people sick a day. The hospitals so far are succeeding in maintaining the death rate very low, and the heavily sick also is good number, but it won't last for long. And there is a big fight of what we can open and what we cannot open, and everybody fighting for his own little piece of world, and that's what's going on in Israel. Everybody is focusing only on corona now. It's like nobody talking about anything. But within the corona, there is a lot of politics. So we have a huge government that cannot function because when you have 36 ministers and the minister of health is saying that we need to close and to do like a shelter in. The guys that in charge of the restaurant, the ministers that have connection with the restaurant said, well, we need to protect the restaurant owner. And this one saying we need to protect the schools, and everybody's pushing on his own direction. It's very, very hard for Benjamin Netanyahu to manage a government. And he has a lot of other stuff on his head, with his trial and whatever. So it's pretty dicey now in Israel. but it's totally focusing on one thing, which is the corona, nothing else. I mean,
What is
you can
happening
read
in the
like
rest
2
of the-
pages of the news and there is nothing else except the corona.
You don't hear much about the rest of the Arab world. What is going on there?
You mean in
Egypt.
regards of the corona? It's
Yes.
pretty bad. It's pretty bad. So the Palestinian Authority next door to us was very strong at isolation everybody, and they also sending all the seriously sick people into Israel because they can't really treat them. So so they are kind of okay. But in the other Arab, well, we know that Jordan is in trouble, Syria is in trouble, Egypt, for some unknown reason, or they don't report, or we're not sure why corona is not hitting that bad in Egypt. And we know that in some country in the Gulf, like Bahrain had some issue. Oman is cooperating in Israel in sending medication, whatever, because they are doing a little relatively to Israel good. So actually it was really funny. The first time that Oman airplane with the symbol of the kingdom land in Israel was actually in the coronavirus, bringing some medication and equipment to Israel, which is strange and beautiful in itself.
That was Amman, Jordan you're talking about.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about Oman. I don't know what.
Oh, Oman. Oh, okay.
Oman. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Flossie, you have a question.
Yes. Moti, thank you very much. A question. They mentioned FAUDA in the beginning with you. How did that program come about? And how true is a lot of what we're seeing here?
Well, so as I think Larry heard me once saying, so let's start with Daddy. Daddy is a guy, you know, Dudi from FAUDA, the main actor. Dudi was actually the deputy commander of the unit that FAUDA is playing.
Really?
So he's playing almost himself. He's playing number 2. He was number 2 in the unit that he's playing number 1. Okay, so that's one thing that I can tell you about if you want to know how real it is. The training that the guys took for, you know, you're talking about 45, 50 years old kids, so they're not kids anymore. So their ability in fighting and Krav Maga is not as good as it's looked in the movie, right? So the training was made by the same guys that trained them when they were there in the unit. It was written by 3 guys that were the commander of this unit. Okay, so one of them is David Ben Moshe, that was actually an operator in the Israeli Shin Bet, and I don't know if you ever heard or if you want to hear. There is a beautiful movie that's called The Green Prince. It's about the son of the son of the sheikh of the Hamas in Hebron that actually turned over to Israel. So Ben Moshe was actually his operator, and so he's the other guy that wrote. So it's Dudi, him, and they all were part of this unit. So it's basically telling their own story. So of course there is some Hollywood scenes there about, you know, the son of Dudi coming to save his daddy, and you know, I think the second season is ending when, you know, he's coming and see his father and saying daddy, daddy. But this is as true as it gets. Okay. One of the things that is really beautiful about FAUDA, and people really don't understand, that we have tons of relationship with the Palestinian. It's not that, you know, American enemy, and that's one of the things that I learned about America. American enemies are very far. You don't know your enemy. Your army knows your enemy because you need to take a boat and a plane and fight them 5,000 miles away from home. Our enemy are sitting in our neighborhood. The people that we're fighting with are the people that we're living with. The guy that built our house in Jerusalem, his name was Jihad. And I used to climb with him on the roof. And Eva was really worried that Jihad is going to push me out of the roof. And Jihad always said to Eva, he did like this with his hand. He said, me and Moti, we are like this. Don't worry. And your house, I'm building it perfect because one day it's going to be mine. So, you know, and this sentence is folding a lot about the relationship between the Israelis and Arab. On one hand, and I think FAUDA is doing a lot of injustice to many things, but he's doing one thing that is really unique about how well we know each other and how well we involve with each other. You're talking about people that come into our houses, come into our hospitals. building our homes. We're not talking about an enemy that is very, very vague and nobody knows who it is. It's very, very likely that the person that happened to be your gardener has a son that is in the Hamas that will kidnap your child. It's really, really not unheard of. And it's very conflictual, you know, it's not so simple.
I can't imagine living with that kind of uncertainty, paranoia, whatever.
No, but it's not just about paranoia. It's also about trust. It's also about, you know, living together, knowing we all want basically the same thing. There's a big difference between people and nation, between armies and government and people. People are people, and people, the Palestinian people want what the Israeli people want. They want to wake up in the morning, to go to work, to come back, to go to their extracurricular activity, and to go to sleep happily ever after. And they don't always succeed to go the next step between, you know, between nation or between government or between politics, but that's what we want. You know, it's what we all want, and it's pretty clear that when you talk about people, you can establish those relationships because people are people. You see in Fauda that the big enemy is talking to this guy, what his name, the Israeli actor that playing the how they call him in the movie, I forgot. That he is like the commandos that operating all those guys. So you see that he has those great relationship with the head of the PLO that is like fighting with the Hamas, but actually the Hamas and the PLO as cousins that are like together. So it's all mishmash of relationship. You know, you have a son that is here and you have a son that is there. Yeah.
It's a very different world from here, that's for sure. Any other questions, by the way? Well, that was really terrific. Thank you so much, Moti.
Guys, are you curious to see David Rosenthal's face? I'm very curious.
He is a very handsome man, so I think we really would, but we'll see it later. But thank you, Moti. Really appreciate it. Everyone, stay safe. Next week, we'll be interviewing another icon in Savannah. We're going to be interviewing Adam Solander, who's the executive director of the JA. And
way bigger uncle than I am.
He is taller, but you're pretty tall too. So for an Israeli, you're a giant.
I didn't mean physically, but
oh, you meant you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Madi.
Thank you very much. You guys all have a great day. And also tomorrow at 10:30, we're going to be doing Americans Jewish Supreme Court justices for the Sun City class, but everybody, of course, is welcome. 10:30 tomorrow. Guys, stay safe, and we'll see you later. Maury, thank you again for those.
Love to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Moti.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.